Welcome to Wellness Radio with Dr. Jeanette Gallagher as your host. Her show discusses topics of health, wellness, and spirituality, and is about discovering your place in this great universe from your cells to the cosmos. Along with her guests, in casual conversation, she strives to ask the difficult questions that may be holding you back from a vibrant life, and shares new ideas that may inspire you to make a change in your life that you only can see in your dreams. And now, here is Dr. Jeanette Gallagher.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Wellness Radio. This is Dr. Jeanette Gallagher. It's a pleasure to have you with us here this evening. Tonight, we are going to be talking about relationships with our loved ones, specifically with our daughters, and our mothers, and how might that be? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it up and down? Are there attitudes? Is there conflict? Is there just joy? Is there harmonious times? I think sometimes we all want to say we have a loving relationship with the daughter who we always wanted to have and be able to dress them up and have them as a perfect replica of self. Still others are saying, I want to have a daughter so that she will fix all of the things that I did wrong. And we've tried to do it incrementally in each generation. Many others say, this has just been a hellacious ride. I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm trying to do my best. I think everybody has had a little touch of that all along in life. If you are a mother, a daughter, a grandmother, and anything in between, because it specifically is about experiencing a relationship with another, but still having a lot of baggage sometimes, still having a lot of things that are going around in your own life, or maybe trying to always be the fix-it person. Today, my guest is Dr. Debra Mandel. Her book is Sassy and Rude, Her New Attitude, a tough love guide for moms on how to bring back the sugar and spice in their not-so-nice adult daughters. Dr. Debra, thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so excited. I love this topic, obviously, because I have an adult daughter, and I actually wrote the proposal for this book many years ago when she was just past her early teen, that's basically her late teens, and I was surprised to have the opportunity from a publisher to actually write the book and publish it. So thank you so much for having me on.
I'm so glad to have you because I think this is really the tenacious kind of, I guess we call communication, but it's always been there for eons, don't you think?
Oh my gosh, the mother-daughter relationship is so important, and of course, for the history of time, it is a relationship that is so valuable and yet so fraught with so many difficulties just because of the developmental process.
You know, I think if we really look back at it, let's go back in history for a little bit, all the way back to the early 1900s. It sounds so antiquated, but, you know, you and I both have grown up in those decades, so it's not so far back. But if we look at our own grandmothers or our own great-grandmothers, they were pretty much, many of them were immigrants. Many of them had very hard lives. They had gone through the war. They were very illiterate. They were very poor. And if we can experience that and sit back and say, just a few generations backwards, they've had very difficult lives, yet they still struggled to make it through and to be able to have children, to be able to raise them, and to have to learn along in their own lives. Don't you think sometimes we diss it and we think that every generation is supposed to know better than the next?
Oh, 100%. I think that when we're younger, we are so hard on our moms. We are so challenging and judgmental at times. I know I was. And then when I really kind of grew up, I look back at my mom. My mom was from a country called Estonia, which is now a free country, but was part. She grew up there. Then it was part of Russia. Her family migrated to Sweden. So then she spent the rest of her teens in Sweden, and then she migrated to Canada, and then met my dad, who was significantly older than she was, and then they moved to the States. But she didn't even have basically what we would call here a high school education.
Right.
She was just going with nothing, and she had nothing other than she was a model, she was successful, she was doing everything she could do to make her way. She meets my dad. He says, you have to be a stay-at-home mom. She has kids. Her parents were, I would say, in our judgment today, would have been called on child abuse.
Right.
People, right away. So, she was jumping fences and riding horses bareback on other people's ranches. That's who she was. And so she had children, and she did the best she could. And I was so angry with her. She was angry with me. She was a harsh hand mom. You left a cup on the table, and you went to the bathroom, and you came back, it was gone, and then you were punished because you didn't clean it up right away. She was just doing the best she could, but she was a heavy hand, and I was hurt by that. And my dad was harsh as well. So when I was in my young teens and early adulthood, I just thought she was just a mean mom. And as I got older, I realized that she was just a wounded mom. She was just a wounded bird who didn't have the luxury that I had in those days to get therapy and be able to heal. So it was a challenge for her. And so most of the books that I've written, and this one in particular, was with that in mind, to have a loving heart toward my own mom, who I knew did the best she could.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of assumptions. There's a lot of people that are saying this is a given, this is what your mother should be. And really the mother has taken on the position of in warp speed to show up for people in different ways, especially when we think back in the early 1900s, everything was in a book. That's what you learned. You didn't learn anything else. So what a new book came in the library. Then along came newspapers, and then along came, the television. When the television came on, everybody wanted to be the perfect mom like the one on TV. Yet we know that, from the 70s, a lot of moms couldn't. And just as you said about the abuse, abuse is it was rampant in homes in the 60s and 70s. Probably maybe better than 50% of the homes had it, because they were all just coming off of such destruction and did not know how to relate. And I think also, too, I can remember I was the first one of any of my, ancestors that had ever gone to college. And it was like, let's push them out there. And then when I came back, they were like, well, you think you're smarter than us because you know it all now. And it was like, oh, gosh, you can't do anything right or wrong. Don't you think that that's a very common aspect? You can't do anything right or wrong in a relationship?
Oh, my gosh. I love everything you're saying, and there's so much to comment on. I mean, yes, first going back to the cultural input that we had, the social input, the television, media, et cetera, as that expanded, that was so challenging because, I remember being a little girl and watching, Father Knows Best and these shows where the moms looked like they just had it flowingly perfect. Oh, my gosh, everything was perfect. You got in your home, you bring the martini, you have the sit-down conversation, the kids come down, they're all well-behaved. I'm like, oh, my gosh, that wasn't my family. And even in the other families that I kind of idealized as a youth, I looked at other families and said, oh, I want to be in this family. It's like they all had their stuff, so what you're saying is, what's right or wrong? It's so hard to gauge that today in terms of, oh my gosh, do we do things from the books? Do we do things from the TV? Do we do things from our intuition? I know you're an intuit, and this is so powerful because so much of what we lose today in our lives is this idea that, like, wait a second, I'm following this, but it doesn't seem right. I have to tell you a little funny story because, well, it's not funny, actually. My daughter, one of the wounds that she had in her life was that time out was a big deal when I was raising her. So she's 31 now, and I'm in my 60s. And the big discipline then was, there's no physical punishment, which I completely adopt. There's no way that I was going to lay a hand on my child ever, no matter what, because of the damage it felt like it had been done to me. But she was a challenge at times. And I'm like, oh, my gosh, so I was reading the books. What do you do? What do you do? Oh, time out. Put her in time out. Well, she would kick and scream, and her little nervous system would escalate so much from that at some point, I mean, my heart was bleeding standing out the side of the door saying, what am I doing? This is horrible. This is not working. Why am I doing this? And at one point, I just walked in the room, and I sat down with her, and I put her on my lap, and I hugged her, and I said, sweetie, you just have to calm down. That's all I can say is we just have to calm down. So let's do this together. And that's what worked. But I was listening to the media, the books, all that stuff to tell me this is what you're supposed to do. Well, it didn't have anything to do with my daughter. Maybe that worked for some other children, but it wasn't going to work for mine. So what's right, what's wrong? I think we do need to trust our intuition to some degree if we're in a kind-hearted, compassionate place.
That was the onset of Ann Landers, if you remember her. You know, I mean, everybody had to ask a question of someone, and they had to get an answer in the newspaper because they didn't know what to do then. And definitely, that was coming off, too, of also the decades of when women in the 30s and 40s had issues, they were put away into the homes. If you, I don't know if you're a little bit older than, I mean, a little younger than that, but I distinctly remember they were all being put into the homes. So they didn't want to act out as if they were, quote, crazy. So women learned to conform very early. And when their conformity got challenged by their children, it was like their mothers kept trying to push the children into these limitations because don't talk up, don't do this, don't do that, because they'll leave you as crazy, and you're going to end up in one of those places again. So it took a long time for that story to whittle its way out of our generation, so to speak. Now we look at, we're coming up into the years 90s, and it was all about perfection. Remember, plastic surgery came up, braces on teeth, all that other stuff, and truly we were trying to clone kids to be perfect. And really, the kids are going, I don't know, you know, and then that's when they started getting a little bit sassy, so to speak, because they wanted to be perfect or look and be this, that, or the other. And I think that really started a whole explosion of challenges. Don't you think in the 90s?
Oh, absolutely. I want to go back to what you were saying, though. Something came to mind when you were talking about history, and I remember this book. Do you remember the book Valley of the Dolls?
Oh, there was also one, I'm Dancing as Fast as I Can, yeah. They were two of them. And it was all about giving the moms, giving the women Valium to suppress their emotions, to be Stepford wives. It was this whole generation of calm it down, girl, calm it down, lady. Otherwise, you're going somewhere because you're not allowed to have emotions. It's just annihilating our entire femininity. And by the time we got to the age of where I was of age to have my daughter, I mean, my mom was totally of that generation where she was taking Valium. That's what she was prescribed. Take Valium, drink alcohol, drink the martinis, do this, do that. Just don't be you. Do not be an emotional, strong-headed person. You must subdue. So I came into the world of like, oh, wow, no, I have a voice. I can be my voice. I can say what I need to say. And I rebelled a lot, but always under the submission of an eating disorder, all kinds of things that just kept annihilating myself. So when I had my daughter, who was born in 1992, it was my mission to like give her a voice, let her be herself, let her have the freedom to do whatever she wanted. But part of my book, Sassy and Rude, Her New Attitude, is about letting moms know that to some degree we may have gone a little too far with no boundaries at all. And I call it the too nice mom. Like we're just, sometimes we don't know that it's okay to say, you know, honey, I love what you're saying. However, we do need to have a little bit of space here to figure this other part out. And so we have this continuum now, which is just up and down, like the stock market, where we can't really know where we are on the pendulum swing.
where do we go with that? That's why it's such a challenge to be a parent today and or historically, right? It's never going to be easy. In 20 years from now, we'll be having this conversation in a different way because our mothers and daughters will have a different relationship. So I love what you're saying, and I just wanted to kind of give a lot of feedback about that.
Yeah. Because also, too, I think there was also the idea in the late 90s, early 2000s where kids were saying, I don't want to be with my parents anymore, and then they either called them in as claiming abuse or, the kids were doing it, calling in, doing that, or else they wanted to be emancipated from them, or they just plain went to other people's houses and ran away. There was a great deal of that going on within history, around that time. And I can distinctly remember, kids were like, how fast can I get out of the house? 13, 14, 15, they were trying to find a way to get out of there. So I think while the mother is the nurturing, the mother is the other part of the conversation, the mother is the one who actually raises the children, has really gotten beat up over decades. Truly gone through the mill and had to evolve and had to change and learn and explore and become and let go and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, we're looking at it and we're going, well, what the holy heck? What is this all about? Because we've really taken ourselves and just chopped us up to pieces. Don't you think?
I do. I hear what you're saying, and it's such a challenge because there are so many factors in that expression that you gave. It's so difficult. Like, first of all, I just want to say also to all, if there's any dads listening here, the dads who have taken on the role of nurturing and have taken on their kids, I applaud you because I've seen more and more of that in my practice and out in the world, which is a beautiful thing. So it's that role. We have the mother role as the nurturer, and the nurturer is so incredibly important. But whether that's the mom or the dad, we do need to honor whoever's taking on that role for children. And what you're saying is, yes, there was this really, I'm going to say sad. I could be angry about it, but I can also just be sad about it, that in society, a lot of times when we have new information, like, oh, that's called abuse. And then there's going to be many people who will latch onto that and then run with it. And they'll run with it and they'll say, oh, yeah, I'm one of those. So we have to be really careful with the labels and the terms that we use when we describe our experience. A lot of people will say, oh, my mother raised her voice to me once. She's abusive. Nah. Yeah. Sorry. Right. That is not abusive. You want to latch onto that term. We're talking about somebody who's taking you down. They're beating you. They're putting you in a corner. They're just really vile. It is not the moment where your mom raises her voice and says, honey, stop doing that. I can't stand it. That is not abuse. It is a moment in time where somebody a little escalated trying to find a way to help calm the situation. Is that the best way? No. But is it a way? And does it happen? Of course.
Yeah. But I think also, too, don't you think that we have now come to the idea of trauma? So now we've evolved through history. We're up to the present day. It's where trauma is just like, boy, everybody wants to claim it. Everybody says they've been through it. And yet, just as you just shared, there's all kinds of trauma. My mother yelled and screamed at me. Okay, yeah. Okay, so, in other words, is that a 1 to a 10, Or my mother actually deprived me of food and this, that, or the other. Didn't care for me, was absent, like 100% absent. That might be a 10, So I think the idea, though, once they say, oh, well, you must have had trauma, and they latch that on, then we get people, children's mothers all along the paradigm, who feel that everything in the world was outside of them and they had no control. What we're going to be talking about now is there is power within a relationship. Are you willing to stand up and say yes or no? Are you willing to stand up and say that fits or that doesn't fit? And also, are you willing to say if the other person does not work out, they can leave the relationship? those, I think, are very important topics to finish today.
Yeah, I love that. Trauma is something that is very subjective, whether somebody experiences trauma or not. And that's what makes the definition of what's a traumatic event very challenging.
Right.
Because we can have somebody can, so here's a little bit of my own spin on this, right? You can have a stressor in life, and it's how we relate to the stressor, whether or not that becomes traumatic or not. So you have somebody who has a flat tire on the road. They pull over. They make it to the side. They have AAA. They call AAA. They get their tire fixed, and they're standing there, and they're just chatting with friends, or they're texting or doing whatever, and they're kind of calm, doing the ease, right? Then you have somebody who has a flat tire, and they are in a panic. They're on the side of the road. They're angry. They're pounding the car. They're this, and I don't know what they're saying, right? I have no idea. Maybe it's a different conversation, but they're having a different relationship to that flat tire. That person that I just described is probably going to have some trauma about that because they were scared. Maybe they had an experience as a child where there was a tire blowout. They almost got into an accident. There's a whole history of things. So what we deem to be traumatic or not has a lot to do with our developmental history. And that's what makes it so challenging, because a lot of times we look at people and say, how can you think that was traumatic? But then you understand their history, and it is. So I think we're back to that conversation a little bit of, wow, so what is one's history, and how bad really was it? But was it really bad to that person? Was it really bad to their nervous system? But I do agree with you 100%, I think, in what you were saying, that it is overused. The comment of, oh, that's my trigger. This is my trigger. Everybody has a trigger now. I'm triggered because you just said the word yellow. You're triggered? I mean, come on. We do need to be a little bit more sensitive to how much we overuse the experience of trauma, because trauma is a very deeply felt experience that comes with a lot of other symptoms. If anybody wants to look up the definition of post-traumatic stress disorder or acute stress disorder, there are very clear symptoms about what that really is. It's not just an isolated moment of, oh, I feel triggered because you're making me unhappy, or I feel unhappy by what you're saying. We do need to be really careful about that. And then this whole concept of Sassy and Rude, Her New Attitude, this book that I have, it's about moms and daughters really understanding the difference between true abuse and what was just, these are just challenges of the relationship, and how can we overcome those and be able to have a better relationship. Because, gosh, I lost my mom very young. I was only 32, I think. My daughter really never got to meet her grandma. She was just a tiny youngster. And my mom died suddenly, and I never got to heal with her, and I miss her, and I wish I had a mom in my life.
I think also, too, don't you think that many times people will say that they have to hold up their pains as the excuse for their bad behavior, And once they start holding up and saying, I am treating my daughter like this because this is the way I was taught and it is the way it is. So in other words, all of these old ancestral stories and dogmas just seem to be coming through over and over and over in generations, and they never seem to get cleared up or brought to the surface and let go and say there is another way. And now I think what we're finding in the year 2025 is that a lot of kids are saying, yeah, I don't visit my mother at all, I might see her once a year and I might text her, and that's about it. And we think that that's so awful, it's so wrong. But if you look at it in the context, they're saying they're trying to break the chain of those old stories and see how they can create a new life going forward, So a lot of women are getting disheartened in their older age, saying that they aren't speaking to their kids anymore, and their kids are saying, I'm doing fine, but I'm trying to find another way. When in actuality, maybe that's a historical leap that humanity is making. And can we just wait and see how it plays out, instead of just saying, oh, this is my old wound, I need to have someone else make me feel better about it? perhaps?
I like what you're saying. I like the progression of the idea that we break free from the historical chains of the past, 100%.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to disagree a little bit, if that's okay, on the show, that I don't think that once a year talking to your mom is a model of a good relationship. I clearly not the everyday, like, I'll tell you a little funny story here again. My dad, who was a Holocaust survivor, he had to have his children, my sister and me, call him every day. Once we were adults, if we didn't call him every day, he felt abandoned. He felt as if we didn't love him, and it was a burden. I remember being in graduate school, going to a payphone. Oh my God, I didn't call my dad today. Having to call him. Dad, how are you doing? Are you okay? Thankfully, he was a man of few words, so it was a short conversation. I know many people have parents where they want to talk ad nauseum and they never stop, but that was okay. But it was hard. That was hard. But I think there's a balance between talking to a parent, a mom, your daughter, your mom. Like, she's your mom. She's the one who gave birth to you. I think, checking in on her, you checking in on her. I think that want this to be my goal here in this book, Sassy and Rude, is find a way to have a balance where it feels right for both of you. If your daughter needs some space, great, give it to her. Ask her what that means. Does she mean a year? Does she mean 6 months? Does she mean, let's check it out? Let's talk once a week. Let's talk once a month. But I think that connection is really crucial. I think having a mother-daughter relationship in our lives when we have our mother still alive is so critical to our development. But it has to have that open communication where we can say, Mom, I disagree. I think your thinking is outdated. Okay, cool. I love that. I love when my daughter says, Mom, you're kind of full of it. She doesn't talk that way, but those would be my words. She would say, Mom, I love you, but I don't really think that's valid anymore. Okay, lovely. So we want to have that. We want to be able to have a relationship with our daughters where they can voice who they are, right? And if it takes a little time because we've smothered them or we've been not so cool with them in their lives, then yes, we need to give them that initial space. But ultimately, I hope that people find a way to have that yummy relationship with a mother-daughter where it feels really cool to be kind of like your best friend, but still have those boundaries.
I work a lot with patients at end of life, and I truly see how relationships have played out. And, the family will all come around, and they will all have their own issues. And it truly turns out to be that they have not healed them at all. They have not done any work whatsoever. Many have done the work and just don't care. And I think the idea is that, are we expecting others to be able to fill our holes in our heart? Are we expecting others to be responsible for our well-being? In other words, when we get very old, it kind of flips, and elders do need help and support from their children. Like when you were growing up, you needed help and support from your mother to grow up. So, but the expectations and the way it is delivered is not the same anymore. So I think the concept of what are we expecting, or what are we almost on a given. A lot of people say, but I thought this would happen, and it didn't. Is it really fair to hold each other in a relationship to say that this is what I expected you to do and you disappointed me?
I have a saying that I've heard from others, and so I'm not claiming it as my own, is expectations are resentments under construction. And resentments are like swallowing poison and waiting for the other guy to die. So what you're saying is so critical to understanding what we want in our relationships. And it's very curious to me as well. So what do you discover when you're working with end-of-life patients? What do you discover? For me, I'm going to ask that question, but for one moment, for me, I think we have to really be mindful about our expectations. And I talk about that in the book. It's so critical that we understand what our expectations are, because if we have not made those known and we don't have agreements with somebody, we are doomed to become resentful. So what do you discover with the people you work with?
It's even within my own family when my parents had, my father had passed away, it was very much, okay, thank you for letting me know. And it wasn't a tether line because I had made peace with the situation myself over the decades. So it wasn't something that I had created. Everyone knew my expectations, and it was very clear. But it wasn't something that I had to do to appease others or do to appease my fear of not doing it or doing it to appease, losing other people in the family. I think that's very important also, too. People go around with a whole lot of fake conditional love, and we see that quite often. Yeah. And a fake conditional love is just like, to me, it's just like you're just going down the swamp, and honey, you're chained. You're going nowhere. And I don't engage in that, and I truly live very succinctly and very clearly from that. And I think yet a lot of mothers will put up with that because they will feel like then there won't be anybody around and blah blah blah. And it's like, which is worse? That fake love that you see, that you believe is there, is really, it's just sinking you. It's just draining you. And I see a lot of women who are so drained by the age of 70 and 80 that they're just like, boy, if I get up the next day, it was like, oh, what a disappointment, because they really felt drained of their expectations in their life. That's really when you have to say, what are you going to do now? But sometimes it's too late. They don't want to do anything anymore. So we're really at a point of, we don't have to control the relationships. We don't have to fix anyone's. What you and I are doing today is sharing inspiration of how relationships can look and understand, hey, if you're in one of those places, we see you. And I think that's what you and I want to say is that we see your pain, we see your hurt, we see what's going on, and we understand it. Because really that's what everybody needs, is to feel like they've been understood, don't you think?
Oh, I love what you're saying. And yeah, understood, and living an authentic life, right? I think that's what we're talking about, is to be able to live authentically, but also feel empathetically toward others and have that received. And if you're in a relationship, mother-daughter, or any other type of relationship, of course there are many others, to understand what is your role in, are you living authentically? Are you living empathetically and compassionately? And are you setting the boundaries that you need to set for yourself to make sure that you are doing that? And that's really hard for people because, yes, back to our conversation earlier, which is about trauma, right? Many of us do have real trauma, and we don't trust relationships. We don't trust that there's the capacity to be authentic. But one of the things that I always advise people is never walk into a new relationship holding all of the baggage that you had from the other and making determinations based on that, because you're going to make a mistake. It might be a different person. It's one thing to walk into a relationship where maybe the person you were with was chronically abusive, and you walk into a new relationship and you fear that you have to put your boundaries up, your barriers up, because you might be hit or yelled at or demeaned. Well, what if this person is kind and all you're doing is putting up those barriers? So now you're going to annihilate this kind person because you know that they're going to be just like your ex. So even in mother-daughter relationships, we take on we put into that a lot of what we've learned in our previous relationships, assuming that this little being in front of us is going to turn out just the way those old other people did. But maybe not. So we have to start, every relationship we have, we want to start it as fresh as we can and learn from that relationship. And that is what I'm talking about when I say being authentic, being empathetic and compassionate, and having boundaries. It's a conundrum, boy. I haven't mastered it. I don't know, have you? No, I haven't.
Yeah. What I've really found, though, is that if you can step back, and I've said it a lot of times to patients, is they would say, my daughter this, my brother that, my father, all those kind of labels. And I said, well, let's take that away. Let's just treat them as people. And let's just say, this is a person. How would you like to be cared for, engage in, and just be able to walk through this relationship? Let's start there.
Love it. Yeah.
You know,
it's amazing.
Because once we take away the ownership that they are my kids, nobody owns anybody. You know, that idea of if I have ownership, then I'm going to have a certain path. And then if they don't do it because they're my kids, how dare they? But that's pretty disheartening and dishumanic. You know, I mean, we should not be treating each other like that. We should just treat each other as another person, don't you think?
Absolutely, yeah. Oh, I love that you brought that up. The ownership capacity. This is my child, so therefore my child should do what my way is. Really? Why?
Right.
That's another whole huge topic. I don't know if you want to dive into it too deeply, but I'll just say this idea that parents say, I want to be respected. My child must respect me. Well, why? Why? Did you earn their respect? Why would somebody on the planet just simply respect you simply because you are? I think that we have to earn trust and respect. So if you want your children to respect you, you want your daughter to respect you, as the mom, I think you have to be conscientious about what you're putting into that mix. And that comes from compassion, listening to our children, listen to who they are, what they have to say. You may not always agree with it. And by the way, again, we may have to set boundaries. But the idea is that we understand and we don't own them. We do. I mean, we're responsible for them, of course. Society and the law tells us we are 100% responsible for their behavior until they are 18.
Right.
But there's limits to what that means, and there are lots of ways in which we can work with that in a way that's loving, compassionate, and respectful of them.
Yeah, I think I've pretty much effectively very much let my children go do their own thing and stay that way. You know, when they became old enough, it was, okay, they're like, don't like me on my social media, don't friend me, leave it separate. And it was like, okay, awesome. And I said that was fine. You know, I had no big deal with that. And then, and I think it was about before the last set of hurricanes, I went through the house and put 4 boxes on the floor, picked up all their stuff that was left here, gave it back to them, and I said, the day I die, don't come to my house expecting to say, oh, look at how long Mom kept this, you know, blah, blah, blah. It's because I didn't want the story to be attached to that, you know. Yeah. I see so many times when patients are, you know, they're holding on to these things and ideas so that people will remember them or blah, 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 and all this other stuff. And it's like, honey, when you go through that door and when you die, you're just squeezing through it and you're gone. It means absolutely nothing else to you anymore. And your stuff will be out on the street tomorrow, you know. So if we can decide that, can we let go of the old way of tethering and saying, you have to do this because you're my mother, you'll have to take care of me later, I'll have to take care of this, that, or the other, and take off those old ways, you know, of ideas, off the kind of definitive things about how we should have a relationship. You might get down to the core of what a relationship might actually be, perhaps.
So progressive. I love that, Dr. Jeanette. Yes, of course. And how do we get rid of those archaic views about holding on to materialism or these concepts of, oh, I have to have this will show who I was or how I am. It's a challenge. It's a challenge for most people because I think, you know, back to at the beginning of our conversation, you asked about social and cultural and history and what we're programmed to be. And boy, are we programmed to hold on to that stuff. It's so hard to let go of it. But yeah, it's so meaningful because what you're saying, and I think I agree 100%, is at the end of life, what are you going to look back on? Are you going to look back on that you gave your son a Rolex for his 30th birthday, or you bought your daughter whatever, a car when she was 16? Or are you going to say, oh, did I feel the love from my daughter? Did I feel the love from my son? Did I feel the love from my partner or my friends or my loved ones? Did people feel that I love them? Did people feel my love for them? I think that's what I know, that in the end of my life, I don't know this because I hope I'm not there yet or even close, but I believe that one of my biggest questions at the end is going to be, do people feel the love in my heart that I know that I have? Did I show that enough? Was I there enough in that way? That's what's going to mean something to me, not the legacy of how much money I left or what house I left or all that.
Right. I quite literally have seen women who said that they were terrible mothers and they saved every dime that they could until the day they died, and so that they would, quote, leave a legacy for their children, and then they would hope that their children would, quote, forgive them and have all this money and blah, blah, blah. And they were even eating cat food along the way. And I'm going, are you serious? What is that all about? And I find it, I pretty much am pretty blatant with them. I'm like, sweetheart, if they didn't have any care then, they are not going to have the care now. And even, people would save stuff in their home. They wanted to hand it down to their kids. Their kids come to the house and they throw everything in the garbage. So the idea is that, are we looking at having conditional love in the way we were taught along the generations, paying things forward, giving things, all that kind of tokenization? Or are we now looking at the point of how do we establish unconditional love, which has no barriers and it has no basis in story or experience? Pretty much I kind of teach unconditional love. It has zero basis. It has no outcomes, it has no boundaries, has no restrictions, and has nothing to do with the stories. It doesn't need to be fixed. It doesn't need to be nurtured. It doesn't anything. And that's truly, I think, a leap where we are coming up on. As we embark on the next 25 years, hopefully, we will come to the point where we will recognize that, potentially.
Yeah. Oh, such a big statement. Yeah, that's so powerful, to be able to get into that space of having no conditions, actually being able to love and not expecting anything in return. I don't know that most of us ever achieve that to the end, ever, but it's a great aspiration. I think kind of our mindsets are wired to be contrary to that we have to have certain expectations of things for our survival. So we're always in this, the more we practice mindfulness and meditation and understanding that we can let go of some of that more primitive brain power that we have. Because it is a power. It does drive us to a big degree. So I always try to practice, as I'm sure you do too, that we accept that about human nature, and we try to rise above it as much as we can. And part of my purpose of the book, Sassy and Rouge, Her New Attitude, is to help mothers and daughters where moms take responsibility for that which they can, and the ways in which they may have mismanaged their mothering. Just own it. Just say it and own it. So it can relieve, to some degree, that pressure that your daughter may have in her own heart that, well, like, I want to love my mom unconditionally, but. So we try to relieve those buts and say, yeah, she did that, and you know what? I love her. And the mom says, yeah, she was kind of a pain in my butt, and I love her. And, so it's an and. I think, though, that we do have to accept to some degree that our brains are constantly going to be pushing on us to have some of those other thoughts, that contrary thinking than what we aspire to have. But I love the concept that we can be in the now, we can appreciate, and we can love unconditionally. I love that, and I do aspire to that every day. I'm not that great at it, but I'm trying.
I think it's going to take evolutions to be able to do that. But I know for myself, I've been teaching it, and others have struggled with it quite often. But once you get there, it's sort of, the world becomes a freer place. And then you just understand that you're just here to pass on the information. So I think what we did today is we just shared tips of inspiration, stories, and how you can be able to be okay and be valid in your own world, don't you think?
I do, and I know we're running out of time, but I have to say one thing about that unconditional love and acceptance. Mm-hmm. My daughter was just finishing up high school, and she says to me, "Mom, I'm going to drop out and I'm going to hitchhike across the country." Mm-hmm. And I said, "What?" She said, "There's not a darn thing you can do about it." And I said, "You're right. Okay, I love you. I hope you choose not to do that, and I hope you pick wisely when you get into a car, but please don't do that." And she said, "That's what I'm going to do." Did she do that? No, she did way more to cause me acceptance. Travel all over the planet in all kinds of ways. But I had to learn at that moment, oh my, I'm not going to have a darn say in this at all. So, all right, Debra. And my friends would say, "How can you accept that?" I said, "Do I really have a choice? Mm-hmm. I can accept it or not. I can live in peace and accept that I have no control, or I can be anxious every night and not sleep." I chose the other. I chose to accept. She's a beautiful woman.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think the idea is that no matter what paths our children choose, they are still people, and it's up to them. There's a lot of who choose a different road. It could be drug abuse. It could be suicide. It could be they could go out and have 10 kids by the time they're 25. They could turn out and be the greatest person ever, and they could turn out and be the most loving person ever. What the difference is that people are now expanding in the paradigm. In other words, they're becoming the outliers. They're saying, I don't want to be that one person within that, standard deviation in the middle where everybody's trying to shove me into to be like everybody else. So as we now birth children who are expanding their parameters and how they want to exist, it truly is a challenge for everyone. So I think that no matter where you are in the paradigm, you can either go on the ride with them, or you could stand back and say, have fun, and just wait from the distance, right?
Yes, indeed.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Debra, it was a pleasure to have you with us. Can you share with the listeners how to find out more information about your work?
Absolutely. Just please visit my website at drdebraonline.com. It's DRDEBRA online.com. And you can find out all about my practice, my history, my products, and you can find the book Sassy and Rude, Her New Attitude, a tough love guide for moms and daughters on how to bring back a little bit of that sugar and spice on Amazon or any of your favorite booksellers.
Very good. Well, Dr. Debra, it was a pleasure to have you with us here today. Many people are struggling, and they'll be able to reach out and say, this is my situation. It's individual to me, and I really need some help. So we thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
If you'd like to find out more information about Dr. Debra Mandel, her book is Sassy and Rude, Her New Attitude. Please do click on the link on the bottom of today's show page to go directly to her website for more information. And it is about honoring each other. Whatever your path is, whatever comes up in front of you, be it a struggle, a joy, a challenge, a mishap, perhaps even a hole in the road, or a path not taken. Just honor each other for whatever their choice is and be the co-pilot. And if they choose not to have a co-pilot, say thank you so much and just send me a postcard every once in a while along your journey. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is Dr. Jeanette Gallagher. Until tomorrow, have a great day.
Today we discussed many life-changing concepts. Who do you turn to, and how do you know what is best when faced with a health crisis? Dr. Jeanette is a patient advocate. She listens to the patient, the doctors, and the family. clarifies the health issues and concerns, then helps the patient make the best choices going forward. If you would like help implementing change into your life and health, we can talk and see where you are stuck and how to improve the quality of your life. Check the link on the bottom of today's show page or visit drjeanettegallagher.com to schedule a phone appointment today.